Welcome to True Crime Garage. Wherever you are, whatever you are doing, thanks for listening. I'm your host, Nick, and with me, as always, is a man who, when he left for college, told his dad, okay, you're the man of the house now. He is the captain.
And boy, how he cried. Papa, Papa. It's good to be seen and it's good to see you. Thanks for listening. Thanks for telling a friend.
This is great stuff, Captain. Today we are very happy to be featuring Scissor Kick by Kings County Brewers Collective, KCBC. This is a double dry hopped up IPA. Garage Grade, 4.5 bottle caps out of 5. Another great brew from some of our best crew. Here's a shout out to Becky in Redmond, Oregon.
And a big shout out to Dan in Valley Village, California.
All right, here's a shout out to Abigail in Mechanicsville, Maryland.
And a big cheers, mates, to Michael in Oslo, Norway.
Next up, we have Suzanne and Eric in Durham, England. And last but certainly not least, we have a big shout out to Lady Christian in Shoreline, Washington. We want to thank everybody who helped us fill up the fridge for this week's shows. If you want to help out with future shows, go to truecrimegarage.com and click on the donate button.
Yeah, BWERRUN, beer run. Make sure you go to our website and sign up on the mailing list.
Right now.
Right now. That's True Crime
Stop
Garage.
what you're doing. Stop working.
Just stop listening to this show and sign up now, you bastards. And that's enough of the business.
All right, everybody gather around, grab a chair, grab a beer. Let's talk some true crime.
One of the high-priority leads the FBI is checking, an area man resembling the drawing of the suspect. He left his job last Friday, has not returned, but authorities will not comment further on that. Amy disappeared from the shopping center a week ago today, and today FBI agents and Bay Village police were back in the center talking with people who might have been here then. Amy reportedly left Bay Square with a man she believed to be a friend sometime between 1 and 4 p.m. last Friday. The shopping center was busy, but few who were here remembered anything unusual about the man and the girl.
What went on was a ploy that was developed and carried through, and it looked like a natural action going on. It didn't look out of the ordinary at all.
Today, in that same 1 to 4 p.m. time frame, officers were trying to jog memories of shoppers to possibly recall something from a week ago that they did not consider important then.
Okay, I'll be glad.
Police want anyone else who was here last Friday afternoon to call them, regardless of whether they believe they saw anything. Police also are seeking other children who might have been contacted by phone, as Amy was, by a man as a friend, seeking the child's help in buying a gift for a parent. You have had some of those?
Yes, we have.
How many?
Aware of at least 3, perhaps more.
John Harrington, Channel 3 News.
Earlier this year in episodes 308 and 309 titled Amy Mihaljevic, that was from June of this year, we were able to do a detailed timeline of this case. This is an unsolved abduction, assault, and murder case of a 10-year-old girl, 10-year-old Amy Mihaljevic. This weekend, unfortunately, will mark a sad anniversary. It will now be 30 years to the day that Amy was abducted, taken from a small shopping plaza. That was just walking distance from her middle school. The abduction was not a violent one. Amy did not scream. This was not a snatch and grab situation. A man calmly walked up to her and she left with this grown man. This was witnessed by 2 of her classmates. Now, For anyone who is unfamiliar with this case, don't panic. You don't have to go back and listen to episodes 308 and 309 before listening to this week's coverage. We are covering this case in a way that these are pretty much standalone portions of what is a very, very big story. So what is now a 30-year timeline of a very big case, you get that in depth in those episodes. For those that don't know our setup captain, you can listen to True Crime Garage for free on anywhere that you listen to podcasts. You can get episodes from the last 6 months or so. Now, we have been doing this great show, thanks to all of the wonderful listeners out there, for 4 years. So the older episodes, you can listen to those for free when you download the free Stitcher app. Go to our website to learn more.
Yeah, some would say 4 years too long.
Now, I say all that, Captain, to point out that we did an in-depth interview with James Renner, the only person who has authored a book that is devoted solely to Amy's case. That was way back in March of 2016, episode 22. The purpose of this week is to discuss some of the suspects in this case. Now, the information you are going to hear today comes from many sources. This being an Ohio case, the two of us have been watching this case for a very long time. But one source that we will use often is Cleveland Magazine. This here is from their coverage on the 10-year anniversary, which says the Amy Mihaljevic case became the most intense search for a child in local history, involving every conceivable law enforcement agency and an army of volunteers. Federal, state, county, and local law enforcement personnel logged more than 60,000 official hours, and thousands more off the clock. Hundreds of promising tips were tracked down and dismissed. 14,000 people interviewed. 120 potential suspects investigated and questioned intensely. 8,000 leads pursued and abandoned. The story was featured in major newspapers and on national TV shows like America's Most Wanted and Unsolved Mysteries. 2 million copies of the Amy poster were distributed. That is in all 50 states and in Europe and all the way to Australia. Before we get to the suspects, first let's get into some of the known and possible movements of the killer. We've talked at length about the phone call or calls to Amy's home, setting up the meetup at the plaza. I do want to mention it sounds to me that police and FBI lean toward the idea that there was more than one call to Amy at home. But regardless, there was at least one. We have talked extensively about the abductor choosing Friday as the meeting up day. Let's get into the other phone call, the call from Amy to Margaret. So for those not super familiar with the case, the way this works is Margaret is at work. Jason, Amy's brother, arrives home from school. He calls his mother at work, like he does every day. On a typical day, Amy would arrive home before Jason, and Amy would call Margaret at work each day when she arrived home as well. On this day, Jason is the only one to call, and he points out to his mother that Amy is not home. This is not of great concern, as Amy told her mother there was a choir tryout that day at school. Okay, then there was a second call. On this call again, Margaret and Jason, they determine that Amy is still not home. Now, Margaret is a little panicked, and she's going to leave work early. But then, and this is according to Cleveland Magazine article, at 3:40 p.m., Margaret gets the call that she needed. It's Amy, calling to say everything is fine. Margaret asks how the tryout went. Amy said okay. Margaret asks, she said she had the impression that Amy was calling from home. So they talked briefly. And then, bye-bye, see you soon. That was the last time Margaret ever spoke to Amy. Now, before we get into the experts and what they say about this last call, I want to address this first. For so many years, in fact, up until the last 18 or 24 months, it has always just been accepted and understood that this call was made after Amy was in the company of her abductor. Now, all of a sudden, after all this time, people are starting to call that into question. I get it. It's interesting to ponder, but it seems extremely unlikely. And of course, we don't know for certain, but we do know class got out at 2:10 that day. Amy walked with friends, and it only took a few minutes to get to the shopping plaza. And most of the good timelines out there say that it was around 3 p.m. when a man approached Amy, spoke to her, and led her away. So, according to the Cleveland Magazine timeline, we have 40 minutes. That's a big discrepancy in time. So I absolutely believe that Amy was in the company of her abductor by this point. I think the call was made from a payphone, a motel phone, or somewhere the abductor lived or was staying. The interesting thing here, I think, is you can put a cap on the distance that they could have been from the plaza at the time of this call, and the maximum would be a 40-minute drive from the plaza. Now, people who believe that Amy would have behaved much differently during that phone call if in the company of her abductor, that's fair. But it's possible that Amy may have been unaware that she was being abducted.
Yeah, and let's remember this is supposed to be a secret shopping trip to get a present for her mother, so she wouldn't want to give away the surprise.
Yeah, he could have allowed her to call and reminding her, hey, don't give up on this idea that we got this secret shopping trip to do. You can't tell your mother this. Now, I've had some people question why I think that a payphone is possible or would have been possible here. They point out, and this is very obvious but very good too, they point out if Amy was afraid, a payphone out in the open, she could have just fled the abductor then and there. But you and I, Captain, being children of the 80s, we are old enough to remember payphones quite a bit and use them quite a bit when we were children. And one thing that I want to point out is something that's kind of forgotten today, that at a lot of gas stations, do you remember the pull-up payphone? The one that was constructed in a manner that it wasn't in a booth, but it was out and it was in a way that you would just pull up with your vehicle. You wouldn't even get out of the vehicle. You would pull up and you could punch in the number and make the phone call from sitting inside of your vehicle.
Yeah.
This could have been a situation that he used there. What we do know is that a phone call happened. We can't say for certain if she was, quote unquote, under his control, meaning he had a gun or a knife on her, or he had already expressed a threat to her that would have kept her under his control.
Right, but again, let's think about this logically. Are you going to take that chance, have her under your control? She knows this is now abduction. She knows now that she's in some kind of danger. Oh, let's have her call her mother. Or do you keep playing it cool and, yeah, I'll let you call your mother before we go shopping?
Right. Either way, we do know that the call happened. We can only speculate what was going on at the time. What the experts say about this phone call, Amy checking in with her mother and the abductor allowing this call. The first lead detective on the case, Jim Tompkins, said, quote, "That's critical. It bought him an hour or more. Precious getaway time for the man authorities were calling the unknown male." Expert analysts also believe this event reveals important details about the unknown male. They are certain he was standing right there and that he may have known that Amy was supposed to call. Now, this could be from something he learned from Amy on previous phone calls, or in conversation on the day of the abduction, or even possibly Amy threatening him, if in fact, by the time she figured out that he had abducted her, she's saying, "I have to call home. Mom and Dad will be looking for me. You're going to be in trouble." So some of the experts believe that he stood there and told Amy what to say during that call. The late and great FBI agent Robert Ressler says, "It tells us he was executing a bold plot that included Amy, her family, and the police," pointing out that the Bay Village Police Department headquarters is right across the street from the shopping plaza. He goes on to say, "This is an intelligent man, presentable, well-spoken. This is a complicated personal crime." When Amy's body was found in that field 3 months after her abduction, the Cuyahoga County coroner and the FBI scientists determined that Amy had been deceased for some time. Most likely, the murder had occurred shortly after her abduction, probably a few days or less. She was not killed immediately. Amy did eat at least one meal after she was taken, maybe more. Her autopsy revealed blunt force trauma to the head and stab wounds to her neck. It appears that the blunt force trauma on its own was not fatal, but the stab wounds were. Over the years, Captain, there have been thousands of tips and hundreds of suspects. And in this sense, we are using the term suspects very loosely. Some of these men were just look-alike suspects. These were leads that the police received, FBI received, because somebody looked like one of the composite sketches.
Right, and we've seen this with like the Delphi murders. Somebody goes, hey, look, this guy looks just like the sketch or just like the photo, but they live in California, and you can't prove that they were in Indiana at the time. So that's why I don't like some of these suspects.
Well, and it gets difficult for law enforcement because of two factors. One, with the Amy case, with the Delphi case, not a lot to go on. So you have to throw that sketch out there, but they throw that sketch out to the public knowing that we're going to get a wealth of leads that are no good.
Yeah.
You know, they only need the one good one, but we're going to get a whole bunch of people coming forward saying, I know somebody that looks just like this guy. In Amy's case, in the Amy composite sketches, we pointed out in our previous episodes, technically there were 4 composite sketches released over it's a little more than a 1-year time period. But there was a sketch released the first weekend, and then FBI artists came in and did 2 sketches that appear on the same flyer. And that's the one that I refer to as like the famous composite drawing where you see the 2 individuals. Now, it was only one man that abducted her, but we have 2 somewhat different looking individuals in that famous composite sketch.
Well, and 2 of the eyewitnesses, one claiming that they saw a man with glasses and one claiming they saw a man without glasses. So that's where the initial, I think, confusion started.
Yeah, so the first composite drawing is basically a meshing of the 2 eyewitnesses' accounts. They were like, all right, we'll take everything, throw it in a blender, and boom, this is the picture that comes out. The FBI artist did separate ones. So the reason why you're seeing 2 different composite drawings is one is from one eyewitness and one is from the other eyewitness. Both of these eyewitnesses were children, 10 or 11 years old. Both of these eyewitnesses were not up front and center when they saw this guy. They were a distance away, 25, 30 feet away, and saw this man interact with Amy. The thing that law enforcement points out and has continued to point out over the years is they think that this is a very quote-unquote general description of somebody, that this is not somebody that is distinguishable. Right? This is not somebody that would stand out in a crowd. And that's why you get so many look-alike suspects, because this kind of just looks like your average Joe.
Right.
Now, investigators said that out of all of the potential suspects ever to appear on the radar screen, less than 24 remain priorities after acute investigating. Now, early on the local level, there was rumored to be 2 very good suspects. In fact, these men, they were suspects even before Amy's body was found. Suspect number 1 was Billy Strunak from Fairview Park. He injected himself into the search efforts. He joined the volunteers and helped to search for Amy. He was questioned several times, this both by Bay Village Police Department and the FBI. His story was checked and then double-checked. According to Cleveland Magazine, Billy was found to have serious personal problems, both medical and emotional, but all unrelated to Amy's case. Months after Amy's disappearance, he consumed a lethal amount of ethanol, dry gas, and died 3 days later.
Right, but to be clear, they believe this was on purpose, and this was technically a suicide.
Yes. And FBI agent Robert Ressler, who was briefly involved in the case, questioned this suspect personally. Ressler maintained that he had a gut feeling that Billy Strunak was hiding something. Ressler later cited this suicide as a possible indication of guilt. In Ressler's book, Whoever Fights Monsters, Ressler says Strunak was a good candidate to be the one they were calling the unknown male. Now, all other investigators insist that he was not the guy. Stephen Eder, who was a supervisory special agent for the National Center for the Analysis of Violent Crime, said after his death, meaning Strunak, We had access to his home and belongings. FBI agent Dick Wren adds, there was not a shred of evidence for this or any other crime. Etter says that Billy Strunak, quote, simply didn't have the capacity to commit this type of crime. Some in the local community believe he still could have been the guy. We covered this angle of the investigation in depth on our other show, Off the Record.
Yeah, now I have a couple issues with the detectives, the investigators, saying that they don't think Billy was capable of doing this, because most people probably wouldn't be capable of dying from a suicide by ingesting gasoline, right? Gas. So that takes a determined individual. And I also think just his involvement in the search, the involvement in the investigation, the contact with the mother, and like you said, their big thing is, well, once he died from this suicide, and Ressler is saying, well, I believe he's basically saying, right, because there's a suicide, he believes that Billy had something to hide.
It might have been an indication of guilt, that he was overcome by guilt, or he was afraid that he was going to be arrested and people were going to find out what kind of monster he was, and he's going to have to spend the rest of his life behind bars. Any number of those reasons, or all of them together, would have been enough for this individual to commit suicide, is what Ressler believes.
Right. And then so now you have these investigators go, well, he's dead now, and so we can investigate his property, but we didn't find any evidence of any crime. I don't know why, but my gut has always told me that this crime was the first, as far as a killing would go by this individual. Mm-hmm. There might be some inappropriate touching or looking, or possibly even exposing themselves to younger individuals. But to me, this is a one-time thing, possibly never going to happen again, and so that would lead me to believe, well, look at somebody like Billy, and he makes a really good suspect, and then you go, well, we investigated his house and his property and all that stuff, and we didn't see any sign of a crime. Well, here's what we do know. We know that there's a crime scene, I would call it a crime scene, where he abducted her. Even though she went willing, I'd still call that a crime scene. And then we know that she went into a vehicle. To me, those are the two crime scenes, and then plus where her body was found. Those are the three places that we know. We don't have much evidence to suggest that she went back to his house or went to anybody's house. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying that you can be searching in this location, but it's like, again, what if, like you were saying, what if the phone call was made from a hotel or a motel? And so it's like you wouldn't find any evidence at his place because he never took the victim back there.
Mm-hmm. So, look, we could sit here and spin our tires all day and try to figure out why we have the FBI and we have other agencies later saying that Billy Strunak is not our guy. They're not going to give us all those reasons. What I will say, though, too...
Right, but it's not as clear that we don't have, like, some strand of DNA that we can test to make sure that it's Billy or not Billy, right?
Correct. There is physical evidence in this case, but we do not have DNA evidence that we can test in the sense of current types of investigations. So... But here's the thing we got to keep in mind while we're going through these suspects, okay? So the same investigators, or at least the same agencies, are on record over the years as saying we're not going to 100% rule out anyone. And we hear that like with the Delphi case. Now, we can take that for their word. We can take that for what that is supposed to mean. We don't know exactly what that means behind closed doors and behind these closed door meetings that they're having regarding the suspects. When they say that, look, I think that if we were going to create a top 10 list of top 10 suspects in this case, I didn't just go through and pick out suspects that were mentioned in the newspaper or mentioned in local rumor or anything like that. I went through, there's more than 10 of those. I went through and I picked out ones that I believe should remain on some kind of top 10 list. Now, this is just our own little garage list here, but I would leave Billy Strunak on that list until I had further information to lead me to believe that they are in fact right, that he's not their guy. They could have come across some things to say that he had a 100% ironclad alibi for that day. We don't know that because that's never been said in the public. They also, one thing that I do want to comment directly on, though, is where they say, we simply don't believe that he had the capacity to commit this type of crime. Now, you pointed out that he consumed ethanol and killed himself, and that takes a certain something, I guess, but
it takes a something.
Well, but what they may mean here in this is not so much that he couldn't have physically committed this type of crime. They may firmly believe that he was of an emotional state, or he had these personal problems. They may fully believe that he could have physically committed this type of crime. He wouldn't have been able to not crack or not tell someone or not come forward. You see what I mean? Like that.
Right.
Not only did this crime happen, but the person, as far as we know, has also never confided in anyone, never confessed to it, never had a mental break and just came clean or freaked out. So that might be what, in fact, that they mean on this. And again, though, yes, there is a crime scene that we are unaware of. There was a place that she was killed.
Yeah.
That's the missing puzzle piece here. But what we have Dick Wren saying is there was not a shred of evidence for this crime or any other crime that they could find at his home or in the belongings that they were able to view. Now, there is local rumor in the area that, and we have Wrestler who's on record saying this. I don't know that it's in fact true, but we have local rumor that the family removed his items or had access to his apartment before law enforcement did after his death, because they weren't fully aware that he was dead at the, immediately after his death. It took some time for that word to travel to them before they went in and looked at his apartment. So there's local rumor that it's a really good family secret. A best kept family secret that Billy Strunak did in fact kill Amy Mihaljevic, and his whole family knows about it, and they know about it because they were able to view all of his belongings. But what we would know later is that there are things missing from the crime scene. There were items that Amy had on her person that have never been found, never been located, and we know for certain from Dick Wren's statement that they didn't find those items in the belongings or in the space that they were able to view regarding Billy Strunak.
Right, which makes me wonder if the crime scene was a vehicle. Those items could have been left in that vehicle. That vehicle could have been discarded with all those items. But one of the things that I like about Billy is when she went missing, he was a suspect. When her body was found, he was a suspect. And I believe today he still is a really good suspect. All right, we're back. Cheers, mates.
Cheers to everyone. So, suspect number 2, and in fact, he may have been one of the very first suspects, even more so than Billy Strunak. He worked at the horse stable where Amy went horseback riding on the weekends. Some say he looks like the composite sketch. Personally, I think that is debatable.
Mm-hmm.
I would say his appearance was vaguely similar to one of the composite sketches. So this is at the Holly Hill Farms riding stable where he works. Amy was an avid horse rider. She took lessons for 2 years, and her favorite horse at Holly Hill was named Razzle. Holly Hill Farms, which is no longer there, but was for many years. In fact, it was just in the last few years that Holly Hill closed for good, selling off all of the farmland to make room for new housing developments. Holly Hill Farms was located on Nagel Road, and the old address lists the farm as in Avon Lake, but if you look at it on a map, it was very close to where several communities meet. You have Avon Lake, Westlake, and Bay Village. Nagel Road was not far from the train tracks that ran behind the Mihaljevic home. In fact, the night that Amy went missing, police and Mark Mihaljevic and friends were actually looking for Amy around those train tracks. That was one area that they really focused on because Amy would ride her bike there and go back there with friends from the neighborhood. So that was one area that if you could find her, if there was a reasonable explanation as to why she was missing, if she was out on her own playing, they thought they might find her there. The night that she went missing. Now, at this time, they're still trying to explain away why she is missing, right? No one was aware of the ruse used by the predator to lure her to the shopping plaza.
Right.
That info was not learned by the police department until Saturday morning. That's when the case officially went from a missing persons case to a kidnapping, and the FBI was immediately called in. Now, most of that area back in 1989 was farmland. The man that we are talking about, the suspect, his name was Harold Bound. He actually lived at the riding stables where Amy went weekly. This dude jumps on the radar for several reasons. First, early on, investigators were fully focused on the call to Amy's house, the ruse for the meetup and abduction. Information in the call, again, could offer insights to who the perpetrator was. They were working off of the idea at the time that the abductor may have known Amy, Margaret, or both. Persons involved with Holly Hill stables would have known Amy and Margaret. Margaret actually would ride horses there as well. This man, Harold Bound, he was the son of the owners of Holly Hill. According to what I could find, he was a Vietnam vet, and he lived in an apartment above the garage at Holly Hill. It seems that he was an avid hunter. Stories have been told of persons going to the stables for riding lessons and seeing Harold. What they said was he's wandering around in camouflage with a bow and arrow.
Mm-hmm.
Some, I think, thought this was weird. Maybe he was just hunting. Really, from the stories I could find about his behavior, it's really a mixed bag, right? So some of the girls at Holly Hill said things like, "We thought he was creepy even before Amy went missing." Others said he was strange, but thought that he suffered from PTSD from the war. Years later, his brother Greg would say that Harold was a suspect for a couple of reasons. Greg says law enforcement said that Amy was taken away in a blue pickup truck. The farm owned a blue pickup. This, from my understanding, was a shared farm vehicle, and Greg says Harold came home late on the night that Amy was abducted. Harold Bound's parents, who owned the farm and lived on the property, this kind of adds to the whole scenario here. They were actually out of town when she was abducted. They were down in Florida for that weekend.
Which would make sense, Parents are out of town. That's where you're staying. This is a perfect opportunity.
Right, and we both believe that the abductor picked that Friday for some reason.
Well, investigators also said, here's a guy that probably left work and then probably didn't return. So, but that would still put him in that category.
Right. And to be clear, I believe in that clip that we heard, they're talking about a different individual, not Harold Bound.
Right.
But the interesting thing here is if he lives on that property and works there, his parents are the owners. They're gone. They're out of town. Yeah, there would have been other people in and out of Holly Hill Farm that day, that weekend, but he doesn't really, does he need to be accounted for? No.
Right.
I mean, he
comes and goes as he please, pretty much. Yeah.
Correct. Now, James Renner says when he actually interviewed or spoke to Harold on at least 2 occasions. He says that when first asked, Harold says he didn't know Amy from any of the other students at the stable. Then later, Harold tells Renner a very specific story about a time that he saw Amy at the stable and asked her a question. So this is completely different stories from the same guy about the same situation, 2 completely different answers. One to say, I wouldn't have known her from any of the other girls, to then go into a very specific story about a time where he had an interaction with Amy.
Right.
Harold was questioned by the FBI the day after Amy was abducted. Well, that's what we say. I'm a little unclear here, Captain, if it was in fact that Saturday, because remember, the FBI was called in that Saturday. It says that Harold was interviewed the day after she was abducted, but it could have been that Sunday. Regardless, it's going to be that first weekend. He's questioned very early on during this whole situation. He's questioned at his apartment, and he did allow the FBI agents and the officers to come into his apartment. And he also allowed them to look around.
Yeah.
Not only look around his apartment, but also look around the farm property and inside of his parents' home. The FBI agents left, and when they left, they took nothing with them. The feds questioned Harold Bound multiple times the first week that Amy was missing. Harold did not like the treatment from law enforcement that he was getting, so he gathered up some of his things and he went and checked himself into a local VA hospital. Some suspect he was trying to put up a wall between him and law enforcement.
Right.
His brother says that Harold believed that they were trying to pin this abduction on him, and he got afraid, and so he went and checked himself into this VA hospital.
Well, yeah, and think about it this way. You're working on this farm. You come back from war. You know you're a little off, or maybe you don't know you're a little off, but you're working around a lot of children, and one of them comes up missing. Mm-hmm. And maybe... And
you're kind of considered by at least some of the students to be the weird guy or the creepy guy.
Right. But how many times, has a school had a janitor where the guy is nothing but nice, but kids create, rumors. Oh, that guy's a little strange. No, he's not being strange. He's just saying hello to you or saying hi to you. But those rumors and speculations grow over time, too.
Well, and that's the thing, too, that I wanted to point out, where some of the kids at Holly Hill claimed the guy was creepy or doing weird things. Sometimes things are just weird because you're a child and you don't understand a situation. Right.
It could be
you see this dude that's wandering around in camouflage and he has a bow and arrow and you're like, what's that guy always doing here?
Right.
And then but as an adult, somebody would know a couple things. One, he lives on the property, so he should be there. There's no reason for him not to be there.
Right.
2, he's a hunter. And this is a large property that his parents own. This is private land. It's farmland. He is allowed to hunt there.
Right.
So as an adult, that doesn't seem so weird. As a kid, not going to lie, man, if I show up to ride a horse and there's some dude walking around stealth-like in the woods in camouflage with a bow and arrow, I'm staying away from that dude.
Yeah, or the fact that every time you show up, he's there. You go, well,
right.
Why is this guy always here? Why is he always at work? Oh, well, he lives there. Or take this a scenario where a guy comes in to clean an area and maybe doesn't say hello to the kids because he's trying to stay out of the way. Some kids will take that as, wow, this guy's being really creepy. He didn't say hello.
Yeah. So where we look at Harold Bound and say, does he look guilty? Does he sound guilty? I go with looking guilty. I would say no, but sounding guilty, I think yes, because of that to me, if in fact that's true, that in one conversation he claims to not have known Amy at all, and then another conversation says he had direct interaction and names her specifically.
Right, but that
sounds a little weird.
But that's not coming from law enforcement or investigators. That's coming from James Renner.
And you never know, it could have jogged his memory, but you also kind of think, well, if I lived on a property where a young girl frequented and she went missing and then was later found dead, I don't know that I would forget her. So I don't know that I would need something to jog my memory. Now, Captain, I will say this, back to the famous composite drawing by the two classmates who say they saw who took Amy. In my opinion, out of the two suspects that we have discussed today, personally, I think that Strunak looks much more like the composite drawing than this Harold Bound.
Right. It would be interesting to see if the law enforcement did any kind of lineup with these eyewitnesses.
So we do have to keep one thing in mind, and remember, you were talking to me last week about misinformation, and when there is bad information thrown out there,
drives me insane.
In some of these cases, it can hurt the investigation, and it makes you wonder, specifically in this case, is it possible that the man who took and killed Amy does not look like the composite drawing, and therefore someone who knows something never picked up the phone or never sent an email with a tip and a name, because as uncomfortable as it was to suspect a person close to them, maybe even someone they loved, it made it so much easier for that person and so much more convenient when they looked at that composite and they were able to say to themselves, well, it can't be him. He doesn't look like the composite.
Well, back to the truck thing, eyewitnesses saying that maybe she's abducted in this truck. Okay, so my thought is, if you don't have a clear-cut eyewitness account of the vehicle, how sure can we be of the eyewitness accounts of the man they saw with Amy?
Right.
And that kind of bothers me a little bit.
Yeah, and the way that this shopping plaza is kind of divided up, there's some standalone buildings in the immediate area. There's several parking lots in the immediate area. The thought is there's a couple of ways of thinking of this. One, as said earlier, this was not a violent abduction. This was not a kicking and screaming situation. Nobody that saw anything that day knew that she was being led away to be abducted. So no one saw her get into a vehicle. And the thought is either just no one saw her get into a vehicle, or that he potentially parked his vehicle in an area that would be less visible and led her, slightly away and then into his vehicle.
Right. It makes me wonder, though, you have this ruse going, hey, meet me somewhere, we're going to buy a gift for your mother. Is it possible, here's a guy that works at the stables. When Amy sees me, she isn't going to be freaked out because she has seen me before. And that makes me wonder.
I get that. The issue that I've always had with that, and the issue that I've always had with people presenting a suspect that Amy would have known directly, personally, I think that it's highly unlikely, just in the sense that she's being told that this individual is somebody else on the phone. And to arrive and learn that he is not, in fact, who he says he was, makes it weird from Jump Street right there.
Right.
So, all right, I'm getting off topic here. Back to Harold Bound. So, law enforcement blocked off Nagel Road, and they searched that area extensively, and they searched it for days. During the search, law enforcement found a pair of sweatpants in the field or a wooded area in that immediate area. These pants very well could be the same ones that Amy was wearing. This does not help Harold one bit, of course. So law enforcement focused serious attention on him for months. They did intense surveillance, exhaustive investigation, all of this yielding nothing. Harold took polygraph tests. And I want to be clear, that's plural, tests. Harold requested that he be questioned after they administer truth serum. The FBI complied with this. He was subjected to questioning with truth serum pumping through his veins. Now, I can't tell you if he passed the polygraph test, and I can't tell you what the FBI thought about his answers during the truth serum questioning, but I can tell you at some point they were no longer interested in talking to him anymore.
Right, which makes you believe when he's checking into a VA hospital, this is all a part of it. Hey, look, I'm being accused of something. This is heinous. I see why an individual would want to do anything. You want to give me truth serum? You want to give me a polygraph test? I'm not involved in this. I think, and we've talked about this before, I think it's one of the scariest things in the world to think about, being accused of a heinous crime with little to no evidence, and how much that can affect these individuals' lives.
Can I tell you what the local rumor and local thought was on Harold Bound and his reaction to the investigation?
No, I'm tired of you talking.
So the general thought here is that
Mm-hmm.
because he served in Vietnam, because he served in the war, that what he witnessed there, what he experienced there, left him mentally unstable. And it was Harold that understood this, though. He knew that he wasn't of mind to put up a fight and to proclaim his innocence in a sense that made sense to him, I guess. And the idea is that he was living at home and he was working for his parents because of what he suffered in the war. That might have been the extent of his capabilities at that time. And then when he became under fire and under questioning for this abduction of a girl, that it tipped him, and he said, "This is the only way I know how to handle this. I need to go get checked out and get looked at." Where some proclaim that is a sign of guilt, that he's trying to shield himself or run away from the problem. Others suggest that it's just he's innocent and doesn't understand how to properly fight this. And I don't blame him. I mean, you're being talked to by the FBI and multiple agencies. And in the end, what we do know took place is he was polygraphed multiple times. He was questioned after they administered truth serum by his own request. And at some point, law enforcement, they've never cleared him, but we know that they moved on from him.
Right.
So,
again, though, I mean, could you imagine being accused of a crime like this? This is a heinous crime against this young, beautiful girl, this smart, intelligent girl. She has so much promise, and you kind of know her. You at least, you might not know her that well, but she works where you
right.
She
There's
rides,
ties to you, direct ties to you.
And the fact that once people didn't, I'm getting flustered with my words.
And Amy's mother's mentioned in that phone call on the ruse, and he would have likely have known her as well.
Yeah, but it's just, once you're accused of this, or there's some speculation about you, and then you're trying to clear yourself, and I'm sure there's some people in his family that gave him some looks, and he knew that they just didn't believe him, and I just think that would crush your spirits.
Yeah, I think for the most part, it sounds like his family had his back. Now, regarding his brothers, Greg, and his statements that appear in Renner's book, Amy, My Search for Her Killer, that statement about the blue pickup truck, that law enforcement said to the family that Amy was taken away in a blue pickup truck, that's the only place I've ever seen that statement. And in fact, I don't know how Greg came up with that. Maybe, in fact, he was told that by law enforcement. But I've also seen public statements from very early on in the investigation where they were outright telling the public, we do not have a description of a vehicle. And on top of that, when they released these composite drawings, and I'm sorry, I'm holding these up and yelling at the captain. When they released these composite sketches of who they think was at the plaza that day,
right,
if they had a freaking vehicle description, it would have been included on that. As you and I have said many times, vehicle description is so much easier. A vehicle's easier to track down than a drawing of a person.
Right.
And I even have a newspaper article from very early on, shortly after her body was found, where the chief of police for Bay Village is saying, I would give anything for even a vague description of a vehicle. We don't have that.
Right.
So I don't know where that information came from, but it doesn't seem to be accurate. It may have just been a way of cranking up the heat and asking some questions and hoping that this dude might crack. But the other thing that we need to think about too, when we talk about Harold being a good suspect or not being a good suspect, you can be a good suspect in the eyes of law enforcement for a period of time and then thoroughly checked and then no longer a good suspect in their eyes, right? So we referenced those sweatpants that were found near or on the property of Holly Hill. We need to think about this portion of the investigation too. The pair of pants that were found on Holly Hill farm property that made Harold or someone from Holly Hill look like they were involved. We know the results of the autopsy. Remember, when Amy was found, she was found fully clothed.
Right.
Redressed after death, most likely, but fully clothed. Those pants that were found on that property simply were not hers. Now, Dick Wren, when asked around the 10-year anniversary about Harold Bound specifically, Wren said he didn't do it. I'm as certain as I can be in an uncertain world, is his exact quote. In fact...
and back to this blue truck thing for a second.
Right.
You know, it's heard one time, you've seen it no other time. Again, is it something that was brought up by Renner that was then twisted later? It's a possibility.
Well, it was a statement from Harold's brother Greg to Renner.
Right, that's what I'm saying. But the statement, this conversation that happened, was there a twist and turn to get there? You see what I'm saying? And just because somebody put it in his book does not mean it's 100% accurate, is all I'm putting out there.
Well, yeah, and that's why I said we don't know where Greg came up with that information.
Right.
You know, that, I mean, he could have, it could be total fantasy for all we know. And that conversation happened 15 years after the abduction.
And I think a lot of things get changed and distorted and misremembered.
Now, from the articles that came out around the 10-year anniversary, in regards to both of the suspects that we have discussed so far, Strunak and Harold Bound, this is the statement they gave at the 10-year mark. It says, investigators are virtually unanimous in the certainty that neither one of these individuals was involved in the abduction or murder of Amy Mihaljevic.
Well, the other thing that I like about this individual is that there was other phone calls made, and there was a set of girls or one girl that actually rode horses at those stables. So there would be the connection of the phone calls.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and again, it's we're unable to determine which, in fact, phone calls were connected to Amy's case.
One and all for your support, your love, and your concern, without which I would not have been able to make it through this past year.
A year ago today, just across the street from the tree and the granite marker, Amy was abducted from a Bay Village shopping center. A little more than 3 months later, her body was found.
Let's fill the void that her passing has left with positive thoughts, with a smile on our face, and say she blessed our life for a while. Unfortunately, she is gone, but now we must live on.
City and civic leaders and law enforcement officials spoke of love and community togetherness and the Amy Fund and the continuing search for the child's killer.
We're not going to give up until we see this thing through. Amy has touched our lives. She will live forever.
The monument says that Amy lives on in our hearts. Amy pulled a community together as a family, and we still are a family, supporting each other, loving each other. We know that Amy is in God's love and care, and His love and care are with us.
There was mourning, and there were drawn faces, and there were some tears, but this was not a ceremony of sorrow.
Put a smile on. Thank you for coming.
In Bay Village, John Harrington, Channel 3 News.
We want to thank everybody out there for listening. For everything true crime, go to truecrimegarage.com. And until tomorrow, be good, be kind, and don't litter.